I'm waiting for the green light. There's the red light. Good evening. Welcome to the November 14th meeting of the Edina City Planning Commission. Jackie, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Butler. Here. Commissioner Platter. Here. Commissioner Carpenter.
Here.
Commissioner Stone.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Here. The first item of business, approval of the consent agenda, and I would like to ask your permission, if we could, to add an item to the agenda right after community comment, being a report from the subgroup that we appointed at the last meeting. I'd just like to have an update from that. So if that's okay with everyone. The first item on the consent agenda, the minutes of the regular meetings of the Planning Commission for October 10th and October 24th. You received those in your packets. Are there any corrections, changes, additions, so on and so forth for any of those minutes?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is that both sets?
Yep.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of both the October 10th and the October 24th meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is community comment. During community comment, we invite residents to share new issues or concerns that haven't been considered in the last 30 days or which are not slated for future consideration. Ask that you limit your remarks to about 3 minutes or so. Generally speaking, if an item is elsewhere on the agenda this evening, we can handle it then. But would invite any residents who have any issues they'd like to address to the Commission to please come forward and at one of the microphones and let us hear what you have to say. Seeing nobody coming forth, we will move on to the next item. Again, at the last meeting, a subgroup consisting of Commissioners Platter, Potts, and Forrest were appointed to take a look at several issues which have become raised in the public awareness, dealing with issues such as 50-foot lots, building on 50-foot lots, grading of lots, retaining walls, neighborhood definition, and that. And those have been issues that have come before the Commission recently, and we, both the Planning Commission and the City Council, recently received some letters concerning those kinds of issues, directed primarily at some of the development that's being taken place in the city right now. So this is a timely topic for the Commission to take a look at, and I would ask Commissioner Platter if he could give us a brief update on the work of his subgroup so far.
So just a brief update. Commissioner Potts and Forrest and myself, we've met a couple times on the subject. We're really kind of forming right now what it will be, understanding what's there, understanding perceptions in the community, understanding we're working with some smaller groups. For example, we're meeting with city staff in about a week and a half to understand what's happening from their viewpoint. So once we gather some specific information, we should have an update back to Planning Commission in hopefully in mid-December at that time, and then decide what would be the next steps with that, and what that probably after the first of the year is where more public pieces would come into play on that.
Very good, thank you. For those who are watching at home, we do appreciate hearing from the public on these issues, and we know that there is some controversy surrounding them. So stay tuned, watch for the work of the subgroup, plug into the process as you can, and let us know your thoughts, please.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Staunton.
Can I just suggest, I know I received a letter, I assume, although it was addressed directly to me, I assume other planning commissioners received a similar letter at home, and we've received some through city staff by email. I guess I just suggest that staff kind of keep track of those and be funneling those to the subcommittee And perhaps it's worth letting folks know who send those things in that this is going on so that they don't feel like their letters are going unanswered.
Right, right.
So if we can kind of keep those all in one place and apprise people of the fact that they're going somewhere, not just ending up in a black hole.
Just one comment to that too. I understand from the, I believe there's an open house for the council on Saturday. Were there any minutes kept from that meeting? Do you know? I understand this is one of the topics that came up.
I'm not sure, but they did have quite a lengthy discussion on this very topic from residents, mainly in Morningside.
Okay.
I'll check and see if there are minutes, and if there are, I'll be sure to send them out.
All right. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you for your work, subcommittee members, on this issue. The next item on the agenda, public hearings. The first item is lot division at 7309 and 7311 Gloucester Drive in Edina. Carrie?
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. Before you is a lot division, 7309 and 7311 Gloucester. It's located just west of France, west of Centennial Lakes area. There is a row of duplexes essentially on the east side of Gloucester. The lot that we're looking at is located right here. There's an existing duplex on the property. This is a look at all the building footprints along the road. The property currently is zoned R2, which is our duplex or double dwelling zoning district. To the east, high density residential, and then there are single family homes to the west. Might note that a lot of these duplexes have been divided in half so that each side of the duplex is saleable, including the lot to the north and to the south. These homes were all built with a fire-rated wall that separates the two units. That allows that the lot division. This is a look at the existing, or at least half of the existing dwelling unit. So what the applicant is proposing to do is split this existing property down the firewall to create two lots so that each side of the duplex could be sold. There's an existing shed located in the backyard that would be located right on the proposed lot line. The applicant has indicated that they will remove that and move it to the north lot on this pad that's been prepared here. So there's not that encroachment across the lot line. The site itself meets our minimum lot size for an R2 dwelling unit over 15,000 square feet, so it would comply with all of our zoning regulations. With that, staff is recommending approval of the lot split subject to the conditions that are outlined, and that includes just verification that there is in fact a firewall that separates the two, and relocating of that shed.
Thank you. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Staunton?
Carrie, I assume then that it is acceptable to have a single dwelling unit in the R2 district?
It's not. A single dwelling unit is not allowed in the R2 district.
So when we have a single dwelling unit once we're done?
Well, it's
Two
still
single dwelling
it's a
units?
duplex. It's a duplex, but there is
So even
the
though we're
party
gonna-
wall that separates the two. So it's still physically attached. So it's still a two dwelling unit.
Even though there's only one on each lot? All right.
That's true.
Thank you.
Question I have, we've done these before, and as you pointed out, the units on both sides of this one are split lots, and you can see other splits, and we've done them in other parts of the city as well. Do you know when this is done, is there some kind of provision put in a deed or a record somewhere that requires the cooperation of the parties as far as painting the units and that type of thing so that they maintain some consistency on the exterior, or not?
There potentially could be. That would be a private type of agreement that could be put on the deed, but nothing that the city would require.
Other questions of staff? Thank you, Kerry. Would the proponent wish to make any presentation or remarks on this issue? Is the proponent here? Would any member of the public wish to comment on this issue? This is a public hearing. Seeing none, I'll call for a motion to close the public hearing and bring the discussion to the table.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The motion is carried. The public hearing is closed. Commission member comments on this issue? Commissioner Fisher?
Chair Grable, I think this falls in line with several that we've done in past years. I don't see anything different about this one, so I would actually make a motion to approve based on the staff recommendation.
That's subject to the findings in the staff recommendation.
Correct.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this issue? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. The next item, site plan review for Bruce Carlson, 7510 France Avenue, Edina. Carrie?
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Commission, I think you're familiar with this site, located at 7501 France Avenue on the east side of France, adjacent to Centennial Lakes. You may recall a couple of months ago you reviewed and recommended approval of a site plan to build a 1,750 square foot coffee shop in the configuration that's on the screen. You may recall a lot of discussion in regard to the drive-through stacking lanes. The site plan proposed here originally provided 6 stacking spaces, which meets our code requirement. There's not a specific code requirement for a coffee shop, but it met our all other use category for a drive-through. WSB did a traffic study and found that the adjacent roadways would support this, but they did note some concern with the stacking space and recommended up to 11 spaces be provided. So this was the configuration that we were looking at and actually approved, but there were some issues with it, blocking of the parking spaces, etc. So rather than bring this forward to the City Council, the applicant has revised the plan, and rather than bring that revision to the City Council, we thought we should come back before the Planning Commission, essentially start all over again. So this is a look at the proposed configuration, a little closer look. So they've shifted the building to be parallel with France and created the drive aisle in this location here where they can provide up to 13 cars to be stacked without interfering with the parking and drive aisles on the site. This is a look at the building itself. No changes there. Essentially brick on all sides, and there would be that limestone that would match the Whole Foods that was recently constructed. Same architect here. Another look at the building. The site would be heavily landscaped. Landscaping along here. There would be outdoor seating area located right here. The trash enclosure area would be on the north side of the building here. In regard to the parking, the previous plan, there would have been 43 parking stalls removed in order to accommodate this. With the relocation of the building, 61 need to be removed. So overall, the proposed parking for the entire Centennial Lakes shop, based on the square footage of the existing uses there, 705 parking stalls are required, and the overall site provides 840. You might recall the question, I believe, was raised by Commissioner Schroeder in regard to parking for Centennial Lakes Park. Staff went back and into the archives and did some research on just how those approvals came to be with the oversized parking here on the site. And the way that worked back in 1988 when the overall Centennial Lakes project was developed, there were easements provided over all, not just this site, but over the entire retail or office developments at that time that provided an easement for or access for parking. So anybody who was using the park can park in those lots all up and down the Centennial Lakes development. So the same goes for this site here. This site was developed with about 150 extra stalls based on the square footage of the use. So it's something we'll need to keep an eye on should these properties continue to redevelop if we're adding square footage to these sites. But based on the traffic study, the work done by WSB, I think we're okay here. We don't have a parking shortage for the uses out there at this time, but it is something to take a look at as we move forward. Again, WSB did that traffic study. Tony Heppelman is here from WSB this evening to answer any questions that we might have in that regard. So with that, staff is recommending approval subject to the conditions that are outlined in the staff report.
Thank you, Kerry. Questions of staff? Thank you. Would the proponent care to make a presentation?
Good evening, Chair Grable and members of the Commission. My name is Bruce Carlson. I am Project Director with Mid-America Real Estate out of St. Louis Park, and I am the Project Director for the Whole Foods project that went in, just completed last spring. So members of the Commission know me, and I've been here a few times. Also, we are in the process of putting in home goods into the vacated Ultimate Electronics space, and so here we are again. So I appreciate your time and attention to this. And just a quick little background. After our last meeting, I took back what we had approved, and a lot of the tenants and the shopping center management didn't like that stacking that we had because it blocked some of the parking. And the reason that we had the building turned perpendicular to France Avenue in the first place was to allow for view corridors for the tenants behind. And so then I had to go back and have meetings and work with property management and ownership group and tenants and see if they would be okay with having the coffee shop parallel to France, because it worked just so much better and solved so many issues for us, as you can see, for the stacking and how it all worked. And I was able to get ownership group on board with this particular layout. And so our architect and civil engineers have been working on this along with Starbucks to present this to you now. I did do, just to address a couple of things, and Carrie, can I lay things on the table here? And this is actually a fairly recent photograph from Google Earth. So you can now see the new Whole Foods open. This particular photograph was taken on April 4th. And a couple of clues, it doesn't give a time when it was taken, but a couple of clues of when this was taken are, first of all, the shadows. There are no long shadows, so the shadows are direct, so that leads me to believe it was taken in mid-afternoon. And then also you can see the restaurant parking for both Cucumbers and Jason's Deli and the shopping center is very active at the time. And what you'll see too is that there are no cars parked down where we're proposing to put the Starbucks. The other thing, I went out on a couple of occasions and took pictures at 9 o'clock in the morning. And here's October 9th at 8:56 a.m. And as you can see how, I don't like to use the word deserted to describe our shopping center, but how unused it is at the moment. Here's another October 15th at a little later, 9:26. Again, that parking lot is just not used at all. This is just, again, a close-up of the April 4th Google aerial showing again. And these two were discussions that we had as an ownership group internally, making sure that this was an appropriate use. The one thing that in the new staff report that I wanted to address that I would like to carve out, there is a mention of and attach a November 8th memo from the engineering department It's on the last page. And in that, it is suggesting and wants us to put in an 8-foot wide sidewalk on France Avenue as part of this development. As you can see from this photograph right here, only just this spring, this sidewalk was put in as part of the Whole Foods development. And so that's a brand new sidewalk, and it was made, engineered and re-landscaped, and it's serendipitous and has landscaping, and we put a lot of effort into it. And we would like to not rip that out and widen that sidewalk as part of this development. So that would be one thing, and I don't know what else I need to say about that, but yeah, that would be it. So that's what I have for you this evening. If you have any questions, we also have representative from Westwood Engineers, our civil engineer, and also the architect, Kathy Anderson from Architectural Consortium here.
Thank you. Questions of the proponent? Commissioner Staunton?
Maybe we could pull up, Carrie, can we pull up the site plan? If you have it there, Mr. Carlson. Yeah. So you were just talking about the sidewalk, the nice new sidewalk with the nice new landscaping. Could you point out to me how someone walking along that sidewalk gets into the Starbucks?
So I'll highlight that in red. So the sidewalk getting into is right here, and then we have a crosswalk going right into the patio.
So when this came before us before, I was encouraging you to turn it this way, so I was quite pleased when I heard that you did.
Okay.
But the reason I was encouraging you to turn it this way is I thought you could run the drive-through behind it so that pedestrians would have a direct access from the sidewalk. And so I'm kind of wondering why you chose to run the drive-through right between the building and the sidewalk.
Well, for a couple reasons, and I don't exactly understand. Are you saying that you want to have the drive-through come in front like that? And,
Yes.
Okay. The reason that can't happen is because of the driver's side, the pickup, and driving on the left-hand
Wrong way.
side.
You'd have to run the other way. Okay.
Yeah.
So you'd have to do it clockwise instead.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to come from the south instead of wrapping.
Yeah, you'd have
around.
to it's always going to be on this side of the building, so you'd have to put the building over here. I don't know that there's a way that you can actually do it in America.
No, you'd have to come from. You'd have to just reverse the flow of the traffic. I mean, you would have a queuing problem, but you'd have to come from further south and run it instead of coming from the north. The vehicles would have.
Yeah,
to
I think
come
we'd be
from the
back
south.
if we push the build. I think you're suggesting to push the building all the way.
Right.
Okay. Then you'd have to access from here, so you'd have no drive-through here at all.
Right.
So again, your stacking would be coming, as my red pen is pointing, you'd be coming this way.
Right.
I think then we're running into the exact same problem that we had before as far as having stacking inside the parking lot. So.
Okay.
Other Commissioner Forrest?
But just to be sure then, you are planning on putting the stop sign in that's indicated on your plan, right at the crosswalk?
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Kilberg?
I just want to clarify, this door on the south side of the building, will that be used for consumer entrance? Because in the winter, people parking in the parking spaces south of the building, maybe it's cold, they want to run in quick. And then also pedestrians, it'll be right by that sidewalk. Will that be used for that purpose?
I believe it is. I don't know if you have the interior merchandising plan for it. And I also think as far as fire and use for that.
I think it's for access to the patio at think it's for access to the patio, and the main entrance for how the layout is inside is for, you come in, you've got the relationship to the counter, and then this is that access out to the patio.
So to clarify, you'd have to walk all the way around the patio to the front?
That would be your typical place to walk in, yes.
Okay. At other locations of similar, for example, Galleria and the one out in Eden Prairie, I know they have side entrances, ones that aren't the main. Is that something that could be possible here to accommodate?
I think that is.
We
That's an entrance to be used.
It's an exit and an entrance.
This one here is employees only, just to access. The
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Carrie?
If I might address the issue with regard to the widening of the sidewalk, I did have a conversation with the city engineer, and this is the sidewalk you recall that we required as part of the Whole Foods. We required them to put that in. They did that as part of that previous review. To now make them rip that up and put in a new one, we would be okay if the Planning Commission took that condition out. City engineer wasn't real comfortable with requiring a new sidewalk after we just required that within the last year. So we would be okay with striking that condition.
How wide is that sidewalk?
I believe it's 5 feet wide.
5.
5 feet wide, correct?
Chair Grable.
Commissioner Fisher?
Just to clarify, just so people don't get the idea that we just require a new sidewalk every time there's something done, is not really the case. It's just that in between the Whole Foods and now, there's been an effort looking at the entirety of France Avenue, and that's what that requirement. So we have a new idea of how it's going to happen up and down the whole of France Avenue. But I agree, it's a little bit. I mean, the goal is to connect and make this happen as we go along. But there's a functional sidewalk here. I don't know that we would have to go to that standard right now in this location.
If you remember, I was actually pushing to have the sidewalk extended because I felt like it needed to be, and it wasn't. And there was no sidewalk here before Whole Foods either, only the sidewalk on the west side of France Avenue. Well, the other thing I was going to point out, I just took the time to pull out the elevation of that side door, so I have it right here. So it is a customer door with a couple of windows and has, is welcoming. So it actually does have the 2 entrances on there.
Commissioner Schroeder?
I want to go back to the sidewalk. In the France Avenue study, the issue would have been, I think, trying to have wider sidewalks than 8 feet. And it was the minimum threshold that I think the consultant actually suggested would be serviceable along France Avenue at 8 feet wide. So if it's 5 feet wide, we're really not even close. And I appreciate the fact that the sidewalk is new, but the goal is to create pedestrian enhancements along France Avenue that actually provide for that mode of movement. And to have all of a sudden a 5 foot wide walk across this length of site just seems kind of incongruous to everything else the city's trying to do.
What if we agreed to do an 8 foot wide sidewalk as soon as the property to the south of us puts one in?
I can't speak to an agreement you make relative to somebody else. I think what I'm getting back to is that as the city was looking at how to deal with pedestrian movement along France Avenue, we knew we would want wider. We wanted wider boulevards, we wanted wider sidewalks to provide for that, because there is a change, a modal shift in how people are getting around, even in the Southdale area. We knew we couldn't provide that. We don't have enough right-of-way in areas along France Avenue. So there were accommodations made to narrow boulevards and narrow sidewalks, and we got to the narrowest boulevard and the narrowest sidewalk we could live with, which I believe was 8 feet in the sidewalk, and I believe was also 8 feet in the boulevard. So now we're dealing here with something that's really just barely more than half of what we decided was the minimal, as we really started to consider how pedestrian movements along France Avenue would happen. I'm okay with that someday it changes. I just don't know that we should eliminate the condition altogether. I think that there's a desire for the city to have more pedestrian movements along France Avenue.
Can I speak to that for a second? Just to be fair to viewers at home, since I was the one that brought through the approvals for the Whole Foods and put in the sidewalk last spring. I was never asked to put in an 8-foot wide sidewalk, and I didn't argue to make it 5 feet. I just want to go on record of saying that I put in the sidewalk that I was told to put in, and that's what we did. And then it's only been recently in this recent memo that I was made aware of the desire for an 8-foot wide sidewalk.
I appreciate that, and I know you're kind of caught in the middle. We've been going through this for, actually with dealing with France Avenue crossings in the city for a couple of years, and this study has just kind of blossomed since you actually did the Whole Foods project.
Other questions of the proponent? Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Do others wish to address this issue? Seeing no one, I will ask for a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second? Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. The public hearing is closed. Discussion concerning this issue. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quickly. I think overall I like what's been done here. It's I think a very good solution to what was not a great solution when it first came before us. I like the excess space for the cars coming in and stacking. I think that makes sense as well. I really think perhaps the only real issue, at least the way I look at it, concerns the sidewalk issue. And I'd be curious, I know there's some suggestion that's been made that that there may be some sort of condition that might attach to it different than what was there before. And I'd be interested to hear what Commissioner Schroeder has, or what he was thinking about when he made that comment. I'm not sure that I understand what kind of condition we'd attach that wouldn't, other than perhaps at some point in time when the sidewalk is deteriorated, that it would be expanded. So I'd be very interested to get the input on that.
I think you're correct, Commissioner Carpenter. We could delay this because we don't have sidewalks in other places along France Avenue, and I would suggest that it's forthcoming. It will happen as the Byerlys would redevelop. We'd probably change the sidewalks there, and all the way up and down France Avenue. And so a commitment on the part of the developer and property owner that the sidewalk would be reconstructed to an 8-foot width within, say, 10 years. So we're actually getting another set of time over the serviceable life of the sidewalk, I think would be acceptable. I think we allow some time for the rest of the sidewalks along France Avenue to catch up, but I would like to see a commitment that at some point the sidewalk would be reconstructed to the 8-foot width. And knowing that at some point we might change it to 10 feet, and then he might be going back and having to do something else again.
And that helps. I just wanted clarification on that. To me, that makes sense as well. So.
Commissioner Staunton.
So, as I understand it, when we do these site plan reviews, there's really just a couple of criteria. I mean, one is, does it conform to the code, and then the other is, does it conform to the comprehensive plan? And so I spent some time looking at the comprehensive plan, and it seems to me that there are a lot of things in the comprehensive plan talking about the sidewalk that are inconsistent with the notion of having a drive aisle right between the building and the sidewalk. On page 4-29, it talks about creating pedestrian scale, emphasizing pedestrian circulation. The land use policies on 4-34 and 4-37. Item number 5, in reviewing development proposals, the city will examine how land use and transportation are integrated to ensure that new development and redevelopment expands non-motorized travel options. Item number 10, within corridors served by existing or planned transit, orient buildings toward sidewalks and paths that lead to mixed-use destinations and transit stops. Number 11, encourage design of building entrances that open up and link directly to sidewalks and pedestrian and bike paths. And then on page 4-47, locate building entries and storefronts to face the primary street in addition to any entries oriented toward parking areas. So I'm struggling with, especially given the comments about the sidewalk and the renewed effort to create a pedestrian-friendly environment along France, how we can say that a plan that has a drive aisle between the building and the sidewalk conforms with the comprehensive plan.
Commissioner Forrest?
Looks like there is a set of windows on that west side, is that correct? Looking at this, as you get beyond the, I think that's west, beyond the drive-through window there. Yeah, okay. I like the fact that that's there, so it's not just a blank wall facing France Avenue, that you'll actually see some movement. I'm, believe it or not too troubled by the location of the building and the drive aisle. There's a good 30 feet between the roadway, the road itself, and the drive aisle. The location is in the parking lot of a shopping center, and here this, to me, is making a shopping center parking lot a bit more human by pulling a little bit, this building a little bit toward the main thoroughfare, and also providing some activity in that area. The crosswalk doesn't really bother me. I mean, it's kind of a necessary evil, the crosswalk from the sidewalk into the building, and you'll have a stop sign there. That's good. I'm sure you don't want any liability for issues to pedestrians either. So I'm fairly comfortable with this the way it stands right now, because the stacking is increased. There's less negative impact on the flow of traffic in the parking lot. It seems like a good compromise. Also, the fact that it's closer to the street, the elevation, altitude-wise, is lower, which then can help provide the view of the buildings beyond, as they'd indicated that was a concern. So as far as the sidewalk goes, I'm kind of torn. I understand that we're now setting some goals for that corridor. I don't feel strongly there's a need to quickly improve that sidewalk, but I think, and also in that area, you're going to have pedestrian traffic that's jumping off here and there, either to go to Starbucks or to go to other stores in that center, so, or to cut through the parking lot to get somewhere else. So I'm not sure in the near future how heavily traveled that will be by pedestrians, but I know it is something we want to encourage, but especially by groups of pedestrians, like 2x2s passing each other going opposite directions. I don't think that's too much of an issue right now. I think, to me, it's more important that that sidewalk, in the near future anyway, be well maintained, that snow's removed, that there's access to transit and things like that.
Commissioner Platter?
I have a couple of comments to that, and for the most part, I agree with Commissioner Forrest. One of the things, it does create a more pedestrian in this parking lot, even though there's nothing there today. I don't see how it can be done, but it would be nice, I agree, it would be nice to have a place to sit along France Avenue versus where it's at. I'm looking at this, though, and I really don't see how, unless there's some other, I will say the crosswalk coming across there, those cars are going to automatically be stopping when they come in. I mean, you will get it's not like a traffic lane where it's continuous driving. They will, you will have a pause as they stop for things. So I'm not as concerned maybe as Commissioner Staunton is about that piece. I will say, though, just my comments on the exterior to kind of mix it up a little bit, the west elevation to me, the one on France, I know it's your back of house, I'm sure, as you go north of the drive-through window, is just a big blank wall. And I really think you need to do something else with that area. Bookend windows that are similar to your seating area on the south end of that, but I think there really needs to be something else besides this blank wall. You are facing France Avenue, which is, thousands of people per day in one of the signature areas of the city. And I really think you need to be doing something else besides just putting the prototype in here along that elevation. So that was my comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Fisher, did you have? No? Mr. Schroeder?
Chair Grable, I also want to go back to something that Planner Teague mentioned. I did ask Carrie a question about the overall parking available for the park. And it just seems that as we look at developments along Centennial Lakes, we continue to see kind of a marginal and incremental decrease in the amount of parking that's available to the park. And while we probably have a really good sense that there's still lots of parking out there to serve both the retail, office, or whatever other functions there are along France Avenue and the park, we don't really have a number that we can shoot for yet. And I think that the ways that parking is happening today, and with the ways that we're trying to get people to access Centennial Lakes Park by walking or biking across and along France Avenue, the numbers that are in the 1988 development agreement may not be the right numbers anymore, but we don't know what they are. And so I want to suggest, for kind of looking ahead in the future, that the next time somebody comes forward with a proposal for development or infill or redevelopment for these parcels that have a joint parking agreement for use of the park or the youth pavilion, that would be more deliberate in understanding what the overall impacts of parking on the park would be, and not just kind of guess at it. Now, I know Tony's here tonight. Tony, I don't know if you've gone that far. I suspect you haven't. And I don't want to bring it up tonight because I think this is just one more kind of marginal decrease in the amount of parking. But I think we ought to be cognizant of that as we go forward.
It's a good point. Other comments? Commissioner Fisher.
Well, I missed the first go-around on this one. And I think in terms of the functional drive-through, this is a better layout. I don't disagree that I'd like to see more glass on that facade. I can't see anywhere in here what the actual plan inside the building is, so it's hard to know exactly what the impact of that would be. I'm not a big fan of drive-throughs, but my assumption is, it's a legal place in the city to have a drive-through. If you're going to have a drive-through, I think this is the right corner of this property to do it in. I don't think it's going to functionally change the parking in this area. Would I prefer not to have a car between the sidewalk and the building? Of course I would, but I don't know how you do that. I mean, without kind of getting into the back to the situation we had in the first go-around. So, I think with all that said, I think it's a reasonable solution here.
Comment I would have is that it's true that the city has done considerable work of late in conceiving what ought to be and what eventually will be France Avenue between 494 and the Crosstown. And it would be very nice if we could have nice 8-foot wide sidewalks all the way along France Avenue. But by the same token, I think it's a bit unfair to ask Mr. Carlson, when he built the sidewalk that he didn't really need to build, to have anticipated what the city was going to come up with. So I'm not too troubled by the fact that, in fact, I'm not troubled at all by the fact that the engineer has more or less withdrawn his request that the sidewalk be widened at this point. We got a decent sidewalk in there, and, would have been nice if it was 8 foot, if he'd have built it with, been nice if it had been built 8 foot, but it wasn't. So, and it didn't have to be at the time, and didn't have to be at all, probably. So, That's my thought. Other comments, discussion on this matter? Commissioner Forrest.
I just have a question. I'm looking at this western facade again, and I agree that it would be nice to have a more welcoming appearance, whether that's through additional glazing or whatever. But then I'm thinking, well, if you bookended your windows, you'd have, how much of that would even be visible when you have cars lined up in front of them? You know, yeah, that's true. It's going to be more so in the morning. That's a good point. But if there's ways that that side can be made more human appearing, more accessible, more welcoming, that would be great. Because I don't like the idea. I agree. We have some other buildings that the back wall, sure, they pull them up to France, but then it just looks like a great big billboard because it's pretty much just used for signage.
I mean, this is the back of it, and it's
Right.
happening to facing France now.
Right.
If I could comment, if you look at the landscape plan closely, you know, the north end of the building, that facade, that's the trash enclosure, which we're careful to match the exact materials of the building. And then you'll see there's landscaping all along that west area from the drive-through window to the north, and then a larger area for landscaping to screen the trash enclosure. So I think, you know, they also have their sign there, which is a feature. So I think if the landscape was added to the elevation, it wouldn't be as plain as reality.
Do you have a rendering of that?
No. Of the landscape, we have the landscape plan and then just the elevations, but
They're not tied together.
not together.
Is our assumption correct that everything, looking at the west elevation, everything to the north is really more back of house?
Yes, that's the kitchen. So we
Okay.
wouldn't have people looking into the kitchen functionally.
You could look in and watch someone like crushing beans or something. No, I'm just kidding.
One thing to remember, too, maybe, that might be helpful, is this is only 1,700 square feet. A typical fast food, the smallest fast food nowadays right now, is about 3,200 square feet. So although this looks huge, in some ways this can almost look as the same front as Whole Foods. You know, it looks like this big, massive facade, but in reality, this is a small little, I wouldn't call it a photomat, but it's not much bigger. And this is about as small, and you know, I know Starbucks has worked very, very hard to get as, you know, efficient as they possibly can in the smallest amount. And it's a bit of a Rubik's cube. And I really appreciate everybody's comments, and this is already our second time here, but it's a bit of a Rubik's cube. You got 1,700 square feet. You've got 2 front doors. You've got to have we have to have bathrooms. So we can't have a window in the bathroom, and we want to have, you know, we want to have a lot of parking for the park, but then we don't really want to have pedestrians come in. And one of the thoughts I had is like, well, the less parking spots, the more we're forced to have pedestrians. The other thing that I just want to, I don't even know if I should bring this up, but we had lobbied pretty hard to have a bus stop here. And if you remember, right now the buses don't stop. They come down and they immediately go to the other side and have the bus stop. And because when we did put in this, have the sidewalk in here, and we want pedestrians here, we also wanted transit, and we don't have that. I don't know if there's still, I'm putting in a nudge here of whatever you guys can do with the bus company to have a bus stop at our center. Right now, Cucumbers has private buses that come in and bring those that don't have cars and come there.
I guess I'd like to add, too, if you look at the facades closely, I like the asymmetry that's happening on both the west and this facade as well, that it's not just kind of a book matched of adding glass. And then, again, speaking to the functionality of the glass, it would have to be spandrel glass because of the kitchen issue. But I just think the proportions and the asymmetry and the way the sign offsets the glass on that end. And again, moving forward, we can add the landscaping to the elevations to show that level of detail as well.
We're going to have cars there, too, actually. You know, when you think about it, the car is going to be about the size of the car is going to be about the size of the the drive-through window, now that I think about that as well.
Mr. Platter?
Well, it still needs something there. So maybe it isn't glass spandrel, but I'm still concerned about that elevation on France. Again, it's the main one in the city, and I realize you'll have other things there. It is your back of house, and because it's a small building, it should be only small piece you have to put on there to make it look different.
How do we handle that tonight? I mean, I don't have time to sit here and brainstorm about a medallion, or I know on that site in Bloomington, we put...
I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, see, I mean, we can sit and design it, but I hear what you say. We could come
I'm
back
not here to
something-
design it. I'm just telling
Yeah.
you need something else.
Well, how do I
there.
handle that as far as to get an approval and move forward? I mean, I don't want to have to go back and come back with some sort of medallion input into the brick. I guess I'm struggling with how I handle that
You'd have to update it before you take it to council.
and come back here with that.
Are they not here?
Okay.
They'll take our comments and look to
Okay.
see what you did in between. And if you didn't do anything, that might be a problem. So,
Commissioner Forrest?
Well, when I'm looking at it, the first thing that jumps out at me, comparing the two sides, is the size of that center stone section, and I don't know if it's feasible or rational or anything, but to make that a little more prominent might make it look more like an entrance. I'm not sure, but that's one thing that jumps out right away as being different. It looks like it's a little bit shorter and definitely narrower than the other side, so it's not filling the
Yeah, again, I
space as
think
much.
proportionally, the way this end and then how it trails off, it's really meant to be an asymmetrical,
Right.
real fine, modern, contemporary design.
I'm just
And so
looking
I
at-
would just envision the lower shrubs on this end, and then the emphasis on this corner. I think architecturally, the proportions are right on.
Chair Grable. Okay. You know, I just want to clarify, when I made the comment, which I'm now regretting, about the west elevation, it wasn't, I agree with you. I actually think the proportions do work here. And so I want to be careful that we don't design by committee and end up making this thing less attractive than it is today just to get it through the process. My whole thing was kind of going back to the comp plan, which is about when we bring buildings up to the street, making sure they're active. Mm-hmm. And the more I sit and think about this and look at this, it doesn't do any good to force some sort of window opening into the back of a house of a building, or to put a panel just to pretend there's a window there, because there'll be it's all about the activity. Mm-hmm. And when you think about this, we'll actually have activity because there's going to be somebody sitting in that window. There's going to be activity at that window.
Yep,
and
this
then,
is
of course,
dining.
the dining area will always be lit and active. And to me, when you think about the overall scale of this building, which is small, I'd be more inclined to not be messing with it too much and just recognize the fact that we do have activity through glass at night. This time of year, I think you'll feel like there's certainly going to be more action there than there is with that empty parking lot. And is it ideal? Would it be great if it was glazing from one end to the other? Of course it would. But I think we'd be kind of forcing the issue. And I'm trusting that the landscaping there will sort of provide a little bit of a buffer on that wall as well. But I agree that the proportions are, I like them today.
Other comments? Commissioner Schroeder?
Can you just talk about the site lighting? I mean, I don't know if you're dealing with just the lighting that's out there, the tall lighting, or if there's other kinds of site lighting apart from the building that'll be a part of this?
We are just dealing with the parking lot lighting for the overall area. And I don't believe we've got, and then it's just the signage and the lighting coming out of the windows that's proposed on here. So the light level in the parking lot will remain the same.
Well, but we don't really know that. I mean, Kathy, I know you've done this before, but we don't see any kind of photometric study to be able to demonstrate that. I don't know if our ordinances require any particular lighting levels in the parking lot, but we haven't seen a photometric study.
We have them. In fact, the tenants require them. And then sometimes we're always in a balancing act. The tenants want more light, brighter, and in some instances, in some areas, you can't have that. The
We're not removing any of the parking lot lighting, so the photometric that exists today stays. So there's no removal of a parking lot light.
But you're putting a building in between where lights might be illuminating parts of the parking lot, where it's easier to get light to shine past a car than it is a building. So that's what I was wondering. And I understand there'll be lights on the building or from within the building, but we just haven't seen any of that.
Well, they relocated, it looks like on this plan that they're relocating a couple of light poles to that southern end of, closer to the parking lot, and then they have an existing one still on the north end of the building. So it looks like they're kind of framing the building close to the parking lot with some overhead lighting, if I'm reading this correctly.
Yep.
Other comments?
So I've circled the lights, the parking lot lights that'll be there. You're in here.
The relocate.
Right in the middle of the drive-through.
Relocate.
Can I see this for a second?
Here, am I missing one?
Here's where they were. It was here.
Oh.
Other comments? What's your pleasure? Commissioner Fisher?
I'm going to move approval of this proposal with staff recommendations and subject to the conditions by staff. And I guess I would add with the understanding that I don't know how we want to word this, in the 10-year window or Carrie, do you have any ideas how we would incorporate something just about the sidewalk, or does it have to be about in the motion, or can we make it? Any ideas?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Schroeder?
We could suggest something that within 10 years of the date of opening or the issuance of a certificate of occupancy that the developer would implement a sidewalk meeting the standards developed as part of the France Avenue pedestrian plan.
As it exists now, too.
I'll throw it out there, and we'll see if we can talk about it and see if people are comfortable with
See if
that.
we get a second for it.
All right.
All right, there's some discussion on this about the sidewalk issue.
I apologize if I missed it, but did we open the public hearing
Yeah.
Yeah.
and close
yes.
it? I'm sorry.
I remember closing
We
it.
did
I
close
didn't
it,
remember
yes,
opening
we
it.
did.
I was thinking that was for the last project, but okay, sorry.
That's right. We closed it. Comments about the sidewalk. I'm looking at is there a minimum zoning ordinance requirement that there be an 8-foot sidewalk along this parcel?
The answer to that would be no. There is a requirement that a sidewalk be provided, but there's not a specification for size.
Okay.
So I think it's really trying to find that balance between, we now have a lot more clarity about what we want along the corridor, but then there's an issue of fairness about making this happen within a year of somebody already building it. So it feels like a good compromise. The only other thing you would add, perhaps, is that, would they have to do it in 10 years if there's nothing on either side? I'm not sure that would make sense.
That would be the part that I wanted to add to that. I would just like to see some buy-in by the other property owners.
Chair?
Commissioner Fish.
Yeah, on the subject of the on the subject of the sidewalk, it seems to me that we could specify a kind of a minimum time period at 10 years, but then with a carve out that's something to the effect that if the existing sidewalks that are in place at that time are don't meet that standard, that there wouldn't be a need to bring it up to that standard until those other sidewalks were likewise improved to that level. To me, that would just seem like a reasonable compromise to try to accommodate everybody's interests.
Well, is this sidewalk change going to be on both sides of the center aisle here, along Whole Foods as well? We're only going to require the sidewalk on this end of the property.
Can we just say maybe?
I think we have two parcels, actually. I think we have two legal parcels. I actually think there's two different lots, but, I don't know. I'm adding up how old I am right now and if I'm going to be around and if I'm going to have grandchildren by then. And I'll probably have twin grandchildren. I won't be able to fit down the sidewalk with my stroller, actually. It's a hard call for me right here. Are the owners of the shopping center going to agree to that? I mean, I think that they would. I think if there's buy-in on the north side and on the south side, right now there are no sidewalks. Like, you have to cross the street. You can't continue north on our sidewalk and you can't continue south. So I think if there's 8-foot sidewalks on both sides, we're like, hey, we can do that.
Commissioner Fisher?
I would recommend we change that part of the motion to say that have the 10-year period, and that if the sidewalks north and south are meeting the standard, the city standard, that this property owner will, at that 10-year mark, bring this up to that standard.
Is that okay with the seconder? Okay, so there's a motion been made to approve this application subject to the findings in the staff report, plus the requirement that within 10 years, and provided that sidewalks to the north and to the south meet the 8-foot standard or the existing standard, that these sidewalks will be upgraded to meet that same standard. Does everybody understand the motion? Is there any further discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. So, can we have a roll call?
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Scott?
Nay.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Chair Grable?
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. The next item of business is a rezoning at Eric's Ranch, which I originally thought must have been a barbecue restaurant, but apparently it's not. At 3420 Heritage Drive, Edina, Minnesota.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. This property is located on the crosstown, just west of York Avenue. It's the second building in on Heritage Drive. This is the crosstown right here. This is an aerial of the existing site. It exists today. It's a 59-unit senior housing development. It's part of the heritage properties that are outlined in blue and red here. This was developed and approved by the city back in the 60s. Overall, there's 257 units of senior housing in this area. It's guided in our comprehensive plan for high-density residential, which allows a height up to 8 stories. And it's all zoned PSR4, which is planned senior residential. Within the PSR4 zoning district, the uses do not allow adults with disabilities. The specific request here this evening is to rezone this site that would allow adults with ASD or autism spectrum disorder. Quick look at the existing building today. This is the building. Again, it's 59 units within that building. It's a white brick. There's no changes proposed to the exterior or anything within the site plan. So look at the gazebo. There's some large courtyard areas on the east and west side of the site. There are, as proposed here, there would be 35 long-term stay residents and 24 short-term. In looking at this, the city attorney has advised staff that the city could face liability for rejecting a rental application from an individual with disability who didn't meet a minimum age requirement for housing. And so he's recommending that we proceed in one of 2 ways: amend the zoning ordinance that would allow adults with disabilities within our PSR zoning districts, or we could create a PUD and review these on a case-by-case basis. So that's what's recommended this evening, rather than get into the entire PSR zoning district and allowing these kinds of uses and determining, we'd have to come up with a definition of adults with disabilities and what's the impact on traffic. There are varying degrees of adults with disabilities. Some drive, some don't. So the thought here is to review this on a case-by-case basis and utilize the PUD zoning. So the request before you is preliminary and final rezoning from PSR4 to PUD planned unit development, and then a zoning ordinance amendment that establishes that PUD zoning district. So the primary issue in this case would be, is the use reasonable and is the PUD appropriate? Staff believes it is in this case. The use would blend in. Again, there'd be no changes to the building. There'd be little impact to the site. Again, no changes to the exterior. WSB, again, Tony Heppelman is here to answer any questions, but WSB did an analysis of the existing use and the impacts that it would have on the proposed roadways and the parking within. Essentially, the staffing is the same as exists today as proposed. There's actually fewer residents would drive in this case than there are existing out there today. The proposal would increase, it would allow an additional use within that district. It would allow greater opportunity for housing, again, for adults with autism. It would remain consistent with the comprehensive plan, which allows high-density residential. So in conclusion, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the rezoning and the zoning ordinance amendment that's before you. The city attorney assisted in drafting the ordinance that's before you for the PUD. It's essentially, for this site only, it would continue to allow and subject to all the standards in the PSR4 zoning district. It simply allows adults with ASD or the autism that could live in this facility in addition to senior housing. So with that, I can stand for questions. Catherine Nordberg is here from Eric's Ranch, and again, Tony Heppelman from WSB.
Questions for staff? Commissioner Staunton?
So, I don't get it. Is the recommended change being driven by the legal issue or by the use issue?
Well, both. They're not allowed to, an adult with disability under the age of the senior threshold could not move into this building under our current ordinances.
And so, Roger, in a staff report, you said the city could face liability for rejecting a rental application from an individual with a disability who does not meet the minimum age requirement for city housing. I get, maybe I'm not understanding. Is this a city building?
It's not a city building, but our ordinances are preventing that person from moving into that
So
building.
it would be someone who is applying to that property to rent a space in that property.
Right.
And because the zoning code doesn't permit someone under a certain age from being in there, is that the issue?
Correct. It is.
Which begs the question of how we can do that, but that's a different issue. So it doesn't really matter that it's autism spectrum disorder. It could be any disability, right?
The way the ordinance is written, no, it would just be someone with autism that could move in.
With the proposed ordinance.
Right.
But isn't Roger's concern about, I mean, if you have somebody with a disability who's under the age, the minimum age, then wouldn't his same concern be there?
It would. So that's when we got into the discussion about, well, we could change the ordinance to just allow that. But then there's varying degrees of disability, and there may be traffic ramifications, parking. So we thought this case-by-case approach
But don't we open ourselves, I mean, if the concern is that, so he thinks that somebody who is under the minimum age but has a disability would have a claim against the city because the city's ordinance
potentially, yes,
prevents them from gaining access to that. Okay.
Commissioner Forrest?
Panajik, what is the minimum age?
I'd have to take a look at our zoning definition of
Is it over
senior
the,
housing.
I mean, and the reason I ask is because in the proponent's narrative, it says that currently they have people who are age 40 plus, so it's doesn't sound.
And that potentially
hope
could
that
be a
does-
violation of the zoning
I
ordinance.
hope that's not senior. Anyway. Because, anyway, the one thing that I'm curious about too is I have a concern about the restriction on it of just, I agree with the use personally, but I'm wondering if there's any reason not to open that a little further. So if 5, 10, 20 years down the road, models change or their market changes or whatever, that it's a little bit broader in order to allow other disabilities or situations if the owner wanted to do so. Is there a reason not to do that you're aware of?
In using that scenario, they would have to come back if there would be somebody with disability other than the autism. You know, again, we'd have to examine the impacts on parking. You know, would they all drive? So those are some of the things that I guess this builds the city a little protection in that regard.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Staunton?
So are we talking about the PUD would just allow adults with ASD?
Yes.
So, I mean, wouldn't we have the same liability issue with someone who has a disability other than that?
Potentially.
Okay, I don't. So, I mean, to me, I don't know why we don't just take and I'm like Commissioner Forrest, this sounds like a fine project. I think we should do what we can to facilitate it. I'm just puzzled by I mean, if we have a problem with a restriction in who can live in a certain zoning area, I guess first of all, I don't understand how we can restrict it based on age. But if we can, but disabilities are an exception to that. Why don't we just build disabilities in as an exception throughout that zoning?
This might be, I might suggest that this might be something that we do here, allow them to get up and running, and then we take a look at as part of our zoning ordinance update.
It appears from the information, the applicant narrative, and if somebody's here from Eric, they can discuss this later, but it looks like they've developed a program which is designed for adults with autism spectral disorders. And in order to accommodate adults with ASD in this facility, they've crafted an ordinance which is the minimum language required to meet that need. And it's their building, and they know what they're doing and what their program is, and this ordinance is designed to allow that need to be accomplished. Is that
correct?
And I mean, so that's what they've asked for. Commissioner Fisher.
And I agree with Carrie's suggestion that, I think we should do what we need to do tonight to allow things to move forward, but it may well be it seems like it's a reasonable question. If we have a concern in this place, it means we have a concern in other locations in town. And if our city attorney is saying we have an issue, that might be something worth looking at as part of the broader issues that we're looking at.
Commission. Other questions? Thank you. Comments from the proponent? Could you come to the side, please?
Thanks. I'm Catherine Nordberg, and I'm the CEO and founder of Eric's Ranch and Retreats. So this is the retreat. We have a ranch that's being built in Montana as well. So that's why the odd name with the building. Anyway, I'm sure that you've all watched the news over the last several years and the rate of increase in young children with autism. When my son was diagnosed, it was 2 in 10,000 births. Now it's 1 in 88. And so they're coming, right? There is no suitable housing really in the metro area right now. And we've developed this with great thought and looking forward to having an opportunity for these young, talented individuals to have a supported environment that still allows them to be very independent. And so it is not so unlike our residence for elderly, where we have lots of choice and only the support that is needed and wanted, but always that safety net and that community that's available. And that's what this is really regarding.
Thank you, Ms. Norberg. Questions? Did my summary
yes, absolutely.
conform to what you were doing?
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Other questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Finally, we got you up.
Good evening. Welcome to all of the people that have spoken tonight. My name is Carol Bell, and I live at 6321 Barry Road, which is directly across the street from the Rembrandt, which is the home of the heritage group that is being proposed this evening. I'm not privy to the advance information that you have. There are a number of residents in the colony at Edina, where I reside, that received letters notifying them that this was going to be available for public hearing tonight. However, no explanation was given, and in the letter it said that the building, the Rembrandt, the building in question, was being the plan was to alter it to allow disabled adults. Now, disability, that's a very broad umbrella, and we were not made aware at first that it was adults with autism disease spectrum. I hope, and as a resident, I am totally in agreement with the usage as long as the security of the residents that are there now and the future residents and the families of those residents are fully informed as to the security issues that might be involved, the severity of the autism, and the behaviors that go along with that. I've been in mental health for 10 years, and not as a therapist, but rather as someone that's in touch with every client that comes in a very active mental health clinic. And the degrees of autism are just as varied as they are for other disorders. So hopefully the staff and the people that have listened to this request have been very careful about all of those issues, not only to protect everyone in the heritage community, but the clients themselves, the autistic patients themselves, as well as the community and the other residents.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Ms. Nordberg, could you address that issue, please?
Yes, the residents in question will be moderate to high functioning young adults with autism. And we also have to screen our candidates. We have 170 families on our waiting list right now. And they will be screened by a licensed psychologist who will be overseeing our program. And the parents themselves in these families also are concerned about the behaviors and the levels of competence and social abilities of all those individuals, meaning that safety is of the utmost concern for us and for these young people. And there are other facilities that manage and care for the less independent, lower functioning young adults with autism or with behaviors that are violent or of other concern for the safety of others. And that is not the individual that we can accept because our program isn't structured to support those individuals. So these will be highly screened, and trust me, my son's going to live there. And the rest of the families also will be concerned about the safety of all of those individuals, and including the seniors who are living there now, whose average age is 89. And we want to make sure that there's we think there's a really great opportunity for these young people to interact with the elderly. And we have requests right now from the Life College students who are also on the autism spectrum to come to our residence and become sort of a reverse big sister, big brother kind of program. So because the social interaction is such a difficult item for young adults with autism, and our elderly are they have more emotional care needs than they have physical care needs, to be really honest. And even though we run 350 activities a month, a lot of those folks just want to have someone to talk to, and to hold their hand and to be with them in their apartment and sort of not have those bigger gatherings. And so the goal is that we have that nice symbiosis, if you will, of the two programs as we go forward. But certainly we will be carefully screening those individuals, and we'll have behavior therapists who are always part of our staff. That is the staffing that will take place, and they're trained to work with these young folks and to monitor what's going on. So the right approach to the staffing, all that safety is at the top of the list.
Commissioner Forrest?
How many apartments or units will be in this building altogether? You've given us numbers, but not unit numbers.
The apartments are 59, just like they are today.
Okay. But 24 of those will be for either transition stays,
right,
family stays, and volunteers.
Short term, right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And is there the reason that, I presume that the reason that this is being brought to us as limited to adults with ASD is because we're trying to find housing for for these people.
Yes, and that's what I know.
Right.
That's I've been working with psychologists for over 20 years, and that's really what we know. So,
but is it because of a need to? Does the model work better with people with this similar situation to be living together, or is it just
Yeah,
because we
absolutely.
need the housing.
Yeah, it's, you know, and I'll have, there will be some folks who disagree with me on this for other reasons, but this group of young folks, the moderate to high functioning individuals with autism and Asperger's, have lots to offer. They're highly skilled and highly talented. And when you mix some disabilities, and I want to be careful because I'm not being critical of it, it's just very difficult to do the best thing for all of those folks in a single setting, because the needs are so different, right? So, so that's why we're even narrowing the autism spectrum, which is very broad, but we're narrowing it to just this group of folks who mostly fall through the cracks. You know, there's not supportive living for them, there isn't funding for them. The highest number of young people with autism today live with their families because there is no other option, but they want to be independent. They just may need a couple of, you know, they might need somebody to help them with their meds. You know, if they're on any kind of medication for any other health reasons or whatever, they might need somebody to help them with their money. You know, they have splinter skills, so they might be extraordinarily talented and understand history beyond, you know, what any of us will be able to recall, but they might not quite, you know, get their shoes tied in the morning. You know, there are those kinds of splinter skills. So we're in a really perfect position to do this kind of supportive environment for them. Yeah.
Mr. Carpenter?
Could you talk just a little bit more about what precisely goes into the screening process that you do?
Sure. You know, they're going to look back at all of the records, school records, diagnosis records, all the medical records, all the psychological and psychiatric records, and make a decision based upon that. You know, there are lengthy records on these kids from school IEPs, you know, from any medical records along the way, because parents struggle with all those behaviors, so they're seeking help. So they go get help, it's documented. So that's what will be looked at and screened for.
So, but when they go through that process, then you identify somebody who, for example, you think would not work within that facility. What would be an example of the criteria that would trigger a determination that, from a screening perspective, that they would be inappropriate?
Sure. Any violent behaviors?
Okay.
Yeah,
Anything else?
Is a big one. You know, you have different kinds of behaviors. You have verbal abuse, so somebody who's verbally abusive will not qualify, you know, and some of those, you know, if there are some inappropriate social behaviors that just won't, you know, that won't work. There are some of those kinds of things as well. Where a person cannot determine, sometimes young folks can't generalize from one situation to another, and so they can't cross the boundary of a private situation versus a public situation, for instance. And so then, if that is the case, and that is certainly something that exists, they won't qualify either, because we'll be in a very public sort of situation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Nordberg.
You're welcome.
Any other persons wish to speak to this issue? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second? All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. Questions, comments, issues concerning this application? Commissioner Carpenter?
You know, it seems to me that we're looking at something that, you know, responding to the city attorney's recommendation already, that we probably should be acting on and supporting. And I like the idea of doing it from on a case, I don't mean a case by case, but by location specific kind of perspective, so we have perhaps more time to think about how else we might do this across the city, to the extent that other locations are necessary or desirable. So from that perspective, I'm I'm supportive of the ordinance as it's drafted right now. Be interested to hear what other people have to say.
Other comments? Mr. Forrest?
When I first looked at this, I was concerned about putting together a PUD that limited it specifically to ASD because I'm kind of against artificial age segregation, artificial ability segregation, and all of that as much as possible. It just makes richer neighborhoods to have a variety of living situations and people in them. So I was looking at ways other people have identified things, and one of them is to use the definition of disability under the Fair Housing Amendments Act, I think that was in '88, which prohibits discrimination based on handicap. Now that has to do with discrimination, not something that's zoned specifically for this. But it's defined as a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities. And I think that's something to keep in mind. I see the benefit of having a population living together, as you said, to best meet their needs. And yet, on the other hand, it's kind of a combination at that point when half of the space almost is for other either residential or temporary housing, for either volunteers or family or short-term stays. It kind of becomes a combination of a treatment facility residence, which isn't all bad either, but I just want us to be really clear on what we're doing here and that we be as fair as possible, and also as straightforward as possible too. In general, I love the idea because I really think, I know from a dear friend of mine who has 3 autistic sons that it's an issue. It's a huge issue to find appropriate living situations as these children transition into adulthood. So I love the idea. I'm not sure I'm thrilled with the way we want to address the whole ordinance part of it, but I'm willing to go along with it if it's, it can always be revisited in the future, I imagine.
Other comments? What is your pleasure? Mr. Carpenter?
I would make a motion, I will make a motion, I move, how about that, to adopt the ordinance as it's written at this time.
Is there a second to that motion? Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve this application to amend the ordinance as presented, subject to the staff recommendations and report. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you for your participation in the discussion this evening. Okay. That concludes the public hearings. Next item, correspondence and petitions. You received the council connection. Note that the council gave preliminary approval to the medical building at the corner of 65th and France that we had approved at our last meeting. You received your attendance report and again the council minutes. Chair and commission member comments. I have no comments to make. Commissioner Staunton?
Mr. Chair and my fellow members, I would like to suggest that in one of the 3 or maybe 2 remaining meetings we have before the end of the calendar year that we revisit one more time our work plan that we had proposed to the City Council. And what I'm hoping, I had a chance to talk to Carrie briefly before the meeting, and I was hoping that maybe we can just get kind of a summary of what the comprehensive plan provides, because I think that's a good guideline for our commission in particular as to what we ought to be thinking about doing as we move forward. I was pleased when I looked through it to see some things that we have done that are in there.
Oh, I was lucky.
But there's much to do still. And so I just thought it would be a good idea before we finalize that, and I understand the council wants to do that at the end of the year, that we kind of do a comparison between what the comprehensive plan has and what our work plan has, and have one last discussion about whether we've got the priorities in the right order and we're not missing anything that we should be tackling.
We discussed that briefly before the meeting, and I believe we're prepared to go ahead on that basis. And we'll look for that probably best either the next or the next.
Yeah, given anticipated projects that will be before you in the next couple of meetings, probably want to put it on the next agenda on the 28th.
And then we also talked about, as long as we're talking about meetings, the last meeting of the year is December 26th, which is, I guess that's Boxing Day, isn't it, in Canada? And it's probable, I would suspect, that folks might like to just kind of pass on that meeting date. So if if anybody has any strong objections to us not having a meeting on the 26th of December, please communicate that to Carrie, and then we'll schedule a meeting if we need to, but I would think probably we don't want to have a meeting the 26th of December.
I suppose those who do want to meet could be here on the 26th.
Commissioner Platter and Commissioner Forrest will be here on the 26th. Other commission member comments? Yeah, he's down a point, point one. Michael was not feeling well, so he left early. So that's why. Other commission member comments? Staff comments?
Nothing for me this evening.
Well, the problem is that neither Commissioner Potts nor Commissioner Platter are here, and they're always the ones that make the motion to adjourn, so I don't know what we're going to do.
Chair Grable, I move we adjourn the meeting.
Very good. We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All in favor say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.